Well, welcome. This is it's probably a one-off walk and talk. This is slightly outside of the things we've been talking about recently. But those of you that read Faith Roots will know that a couple of days back, maybe about a week or so back, I was responding to an article by Kevin DeYoung. He's an American pastor and theologian, and he was talking about what he saw as an over tendency of Christians, and I think specifically of pastors, to comment on whatever was in the news cycle and on politics and things. And Kevin DeYoung was saying that we need to remember, playing on the title of a John Piper book. John Piper's book's title was Brothers, We're Not Professionals, and he headed his article with Brother, We Are Not Pundits. He was wanting to challenge the tendency just to be always commenting about anything and everything sort of political and basically having party political opinions, and saying that we need to prioritise the gospel. And I think I probably would agree with some of his sentiments, some of his concerns, but I pushed back a little in my article to say, actually, we need to be careful before we tell people, no, you mustn't be commenting all the time on everything. Because whilst we don't want to get sucked into party politics, and we certainly shouldn't be using the pulpit for that, and I use the pulpit as shorthand for our responsibilities as teachers and preachers, but I'm thinking broader than what we say in a 20-minute sermon on Sunday. I guess you could consider Faith Roots as much my pulpit as Sunday. I do more Bible teaching through that medium than I do from up front. I think there's a strong case for that. I think it's good for us to remember that we are often not the experts in things. But my argument was, look, actually, two things. One, we are talking about our everyday lives. We're talking about what's going on around us. And so there's a sense in which we just want to be able and free to, particularly things like social media, just as we would in everyday conversation, we want to be free just to live our lives as part of our communities, being interested in the things that people around us are interested in, being able to be open and talk about the things that we're interested in as well. So I'm a Bradford City supporter. I have a passion for football, and so naturally I will talk about football and the football results with people I meet. And that's just my life. I don't feel that I'm forced or have to do that for an appearance of being sort of down to earth and an ordinary sort of northern bloke in that kind of way. I just do happen to enjoy football. Of course, if all I ever talked about was football, if it became sort of idolatrous, and those of us that are football fans have experienced that competition many times in life, then that becomes an issue. But what I was saying about that was that, look, we just, part of what we do as pastors, as church leaders, as elders, is we live our lives and we hopefully help people to see what it means just to live a normal life, to be interested in things, to be concerned about things, to be passionate about things, sometimes to be angry about things, sometimes to be joyful and thankful about things as well, hopefully more of the latter than the former. And then the second thing I wanted to focus, this is the thing I want to focus more on just now, is that I said, look, the risk is that if we start saying, you're not a political pundit, you shouldn't be just responding to the news cycle. But, as Kevin DeYoung did say, there are the big issues that we should comment on, and that's okay for us to to do that, but we need to prioritise them. The risk is that we are left asking who decides what the big issues are. You see, I guess if I was to ask you, and you can tell me what the big issues are in your mind, if I was to ask you, I suspect you would say it's probably the Ukraine war, possibly the Middle East as well, maybe climate change, maybe current sort of legal and ethical battles in different countries, not just the United Kingdom, around things like gender, sexuality, beginning of life, end of life. You might say those are the big ticket issues. But I live in Birmingham, and there are things that are visible and that are affecting our lives right now. Because our local authority is struggling financially, and there are all sorts of issues and debates about what they're going to do, how they're going to find money, how they're going to save money. They've got our council tax up, they're reviewing things like the library services, and in the middle of all of that, I think actually related is they've been trying to look at how they manage costs. A dispute has broken out between the council and our refuse collectors. They've been refusing to collect. That's the posh terms that we used to call them, bin men and bin women. Well, how many blogs, how many modelled Facebook Christian conversations have we seen that have talked about bin collections? I suspect not many, and I suspect they're not going to get much readership because they will feel like they are a very local issue, and yet those issues matter. They will matter. So the fact that there's questions about whether or not bins will be collected is affecting people here in Birmingham. It affects my friends and neighbours, it'll affect your colleagues at work if you live in Birmingham, it affects you personally, it affects people in the church family, and it's affecting them in different ways. So practically it's affecting people, and that will range across the city. Some bits are finding it harder than others. So for example, here where we are, our recycling waste hasn't been collected for quite a few weeks now, and some of us have taken it into our own hands and had to just take more stuff to the tip. Some of us are thinking, well, we can live with that. That's not particularly sort of a biohazard. But it means that stuff is beginning to build up and it's beginning to clutter the house. I mean, there are other areas, and there have been other previous bin strikes where this was the case, where not only the recycling, but the before I've mentioned that, the other thing is we pay to have our garden waste collected, and some people have paid their garden waste money and then being told, oh, that's not being collected now. Others therefore have decided not to pay it just yet, which I suspect will affect the council's cash flow as well. And then the other thing that has been happening has been that in some areas, the collection of the main refuse, your main household waste, has not been happening. Of course, that includes all sorts of things there. You get bin bags starting to mount up. That provides potential food sources for vermin. You get the issue of rats as well. And where rats are, of course, you get issues with disease and illness, and it becomes a public health matter. And so there are practical concerns. As your road begins to look untidy and messy, as you get bin bags being ripped open and stuff starting to sort of get across the street, it's great for the environment. That causes harm to wildlife and to pets. If you've got sort of empty cans or plastic bags and things lying around. You've got that health concern that people have. You've got the sort of the cluttering, and I suspect as well for a lot of people that begins to build into anxiety. It affects people's emotional health. So all of those factors are affecting communities, and it's low down the kind of the priority in terms of the things that feel like the hot big political issues, whether it's the news cycle or whether it's what we think that Kevin DeYoung said that we should only comment on the things that we can get help from the Bible and from, not just from the Bible, from the church fathers and from the reformers and from scholastic theologians throughout history. Well, I'm not sure that Luther and Calvin or Aquinas or Augustine were talking about rubbish collection. And I doubt that any of us have stopped to think and say, but what does the Bible have to say? Does the Bible have anything to say about these things? I suspect not in the terms of direct instructions on how often you should put your household waste out and what you should do if it's not collected in that kind of very specific way. Probably it doesn't, although I would suggest that the Bible does have things to say that affect the dispute and affect how we live. And first of all, just worth remembering that Scripture was written into a world where you didn't have a local authority ensuring that things were collected. So you're encouraged to see that I've just walked past there. You might see in the back view there, you can't quite see, had a bin lorry go past, they are collecting today. It's nice to see. So it reminds me of the day when the British Airways computer system collapsed, and we were due to fly to New York. I remember sort of just the anxiety and nervousness as we went down to Heathrow, and then just the excitement when we saw a BA jet in the air. I thought it's good, they're starting to resolve the problem. There's a chance we might get on our holiday. Well, even now we look out for and cheer when we see bin lorries. Well, that would have meant a couple of things. I'm going to come back to that later. But the first thing that I think we would say in terms of principle to look out for is that the Bible talks about our responsibility to work. So one of the commandments is about rest, but it's also about work as well, isn't it? So we are to rest on the seventh day, but to work the other 6 days. The Bible talks about if you want to eat, you should work. Stop stealing and start working. Be worthy of your pay. It talks, my friend Steve Neal's written a blog about this with regards to working from home. It talks about us as believers being diligent in our work, not just when our employers are just and kind, but when they're unjust, and not just when their eyes are on us, but when their eyes are not on us. And so there's some implications for Christian workers in these kinds of situations. And that working is not just about earning my pay. It's not just about me. It is about our responsibility as part of God's creation to one another. And it's important for us as Christians to be aware of that. And I think it's important for us as Christians to even speak up and say this is God's perspective on what the world should be like. but also remember that we can't hold people to that. We don't believe in and don't worship the God of the Bible. But that secondly means that we do have a responsibility ourselves. We should, I think, be thinking practically as believers about what happens as these strikes go on, what happens if things deteriorate, what happens if there isn't an agreement, what happens if the rubbish starts to mount up. What will that mean in terms of our responsibility to our environment around us? What will it mean in terms of our responsibility to our own families, to our neighbours, to our friends, to our community? That's a question we should be asking, and maybe churches should be asking that as well. But as well as the responsibility on the side of the employee, there are responsibilities on employers. Ephesians 6 is speaking about a very different situation in one respect. It's talking about slaves and masters. I've often argued that what Paul does with slavery is he puts in changes to how Christians are to behave, which effectively abolishes slavery and replaces it with employment. That's another walk and talk topic for another day. But in terms of slaves and masters, Paul tells slaves to obey their masters and to work diligently for them. But then he says to masters, do the same. Treat them in the same way. So there is a responsibility on employers. And this one is, it's not just about pay, it's about the care and the well-being of those who work for you, something that Christians have recognised with social reform through history. And there we see some of the specific challenges around the current dispute. So in Birmingham at the moment, the dispute is because the council have decided that a particular role is not necessary. And the particular role is about looking out for the health and safety of the rest of the team and for other members of the community around. And essentially it's effectively the guy who walks behind the bin truck to make sure that nobody sort of steps in under and gets sort of caught up in machinery or under the wheels or things like that. And the council have argued that role isn't necessary, and they said, look, we will retrain people that are doing that role currently. We will make sure that they're able to get jobs of equivalent or better pay, but that role is not needed. And their argument is that health and safety is the responsibility of everybody on the team, not just one person. They should all be looking out for each other and for us. Well, the unions are insisting, no, it is necessary. And I think behind that is that sense of they don't think that the offer from the council in terms of, we will make sure people are trained to do other roles like driving, that we will make sure that they get equivalent pay. I don't think that they are convinced that is the case. And I guess you can see their point, can't you? Because you can say, look, you can't do this job anymore, but we could train you to do something different, like being a driver or something like that, and that will give you better pay. But actually, you may not be able to benefit from that training. You may not have the abilities necessary to drive the bin lorry. You may not want to. And there will still only be a certain number of those jobs to go around as well. So you can kind of see why the unions might be sceptical at that point. And so what I'm saying here is that one of the things we want to do is to see both sides of things, to see the responsibility of the employees, responsibility of the bin men, but also to see the responsibility of the council as well. And I'm not going to go too far into attempting to answer things today. That's probably where my expertise runs out. My hope would be that in terms of the health and safety issues, that the council will, or already will ensure that the health and safety issues have been properly verified by external people, independent people, that the unions Unite can have confidence in, as well as the council having confidence in. I hope that's happening. And so it's important then that if the issue is really about jobs and pay, that the unions don't make it about something else, but it is also important that the council don't make it about something else as well. And secondly, that if it is about jobs and pay, then I think it's important for us to have a huge level of empathy with workers. But there's also got to be realism about whether there is money and whether there are jobs. And that makes it very difficult, doesn't it? And that may mean that there are no easy solutions, that there are difficult choices here. Perhaps we've got to look a little bit more widely than the responsibility on one employer to make sure that there are enough jobs of the right kind and the right pay, and look at more at how the whole wider economy functions, not just to serve a few people in privileged positions, but to serve all of us. But then I really am starting to stray further into politics, aren't I? And so I don't want to do that. But what I'm suggesting is that it is legitimate for us to look at the small issues, and from them actually start to think about big issues as well. To be very careful, particularly those of us that are pastors, from stepping into party political solutions, recognising our fallibility in those kinds of things, recognising the danger of those kinds of things. But it is also possible to step back and say, how do I think biblically about this? How do I think about it as a Christian? And here we come to that final point, the point that I started to raise earlier, so I will come back to, that just as the people in Jesus' day and Paul's day didn't live in a world where you had democratic government, employment rights, employment law, and yet there were things that God, through the prophets and apostles, had to say to them about how to live in those situations. Well, in the same way, they didn't live in a world where there was public health, where there was public services, local authorities, refuse collection, that kind of thing. And that meant that there were greater health dangers and issues at that time. And God's word had something to say about how you live in that kind of a world. Well, I think we've got used to certain comforts. We've got used to living in a world where there isn't the immediate threat on our doorstep of, if we live in Western democracies, there isn't the threat on our doorstep of invasion, there isn't the threat on our doorstep of pestilence. And we've become comfortable, and we've assumed that that is what the world is normally like. That we are comfortable, that we are secure, that we have our identity and our status, and it's all been provided for by the kind of the Western liberal settlement. And whether it is a war that breaks out, where nuclear power is involved and they start to put threats about, or a pandemic that sweeps across the world, or it is a local micro kind of issue like the bin men going on strike. Each of those things I think are just little things that sort of knock at that security that we've built up for ourselves. And so that should be reminding us that our security is not in this world around us. My security is not in the bin men, not in Birmingham Local Authority, not in Keir Starmer, not in Donald Trump and NATO. Rather, our security is in the Lord. And that's not a security that God will make sure that we never have to worry about the bins being collected or disease and plague breaking out. Not that we never have to worry about the possibility of a horrific war bringing great casualties and great cost. Those things have happened through history, they will happen again, they may happen to us one day. Now my security is in the Lord to keep my soul secure, so that I can say it is well with my soul through all of these things and to keep trusting Him. Well, thanks for listening. It's probably not the subject you're expecting me to be talking about today. We'll be back to other things in the next video. We've got more stuff coming up on desire and sin and temptation. Please do have a look at those things as well. Thanks for listening in.